Hello, all, and thank you for joining us for the Dyspraxia Writers panel. Today, I'm joined by a lovely selection of writers who have written about dyspraxia, and they themselves are dyspraxic or they have family members who are dyspraxic. So their stories are very personal to them, and some of them are help and advice and much more. Now, I'm going to introduce everyone one by one in a moment, but as we are watching live, if there are any questions that you would like to ask our writers, then please do leave a comment. If you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, your comments come through directly to us. If you are watching on Instagram, it takes a moment longer because we don't see those directly. But if you would like to send them over, then I recommend moving over to the YouTube channel. So as I said, any comments, do pop them into the chat and we will see them as we go. There will be a Q&A session towards the end. So I'm going to allow everyone to introduce themselves and share their books. Kim, would you like to start us off?
Yeah. So as Crystal said, I'm Kim. My book is called Lived Experiences, Challenges and Learnings about Dyspraxia. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's just my own experiences throughout my life with my dyspraxia and the challenges it's presented at different stages of my life.
Thank you. Nadia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nadia Frangos. I'm from Cardiff in Wales. The title of my book is called It Just Disappeared, and it's about my son who has dyspraxia. It's a children's book, and it's based on my son's real life experience when he started secondary school and how he managed to cope with difficulties during that first week of secondary school.
Wonderful. Rosemary.
Hi, so I'm Rosemary Richings, and I am the author of Stumbling Through Space and Time, Living Life with Dyspraxia. And my book uses experiences from my own life as a dyspraxic person who grew up in Toronto, Canada. And it uses those stories to help people try and understand all the different layers of what living with dyspraxia is like.
Thank you. Alice.
Yeah, hi everybody. So my name is Alice, and I'm from Gateshead in the northeast of England. England? Yeah, I am in England. My brain is. And I wrote Neurodiversity in the Workplace, how to create an inclusive environment. And this book's essentially about. So I've got ADHD and dyspraxia, so I've got both, and I think a lot of people do generally have both or more. Neurodivergent. So this is essentially about inclusion and creating systemic inclusions in the workplace and how we can create safe environments that we all want to be ourselves in and be our whole selves at work. So I wrote that, and you can buy it on Amazon and anywhere really, and any good bookshops and things as well.
Thank you. And then last but certainly not least, we have Terry.
Oh, thank you, Crystal. My name is Terry Costley. My pen name's John Cedarwood. I'm based in Perth in Western Australia. And I wrote my book about my son, who I call the boy, and his life with me as a stay-at-home dad and traveling to England on our trip around England and Scotland. It's called Travellos to Trainland, and it's in search of a train called the Flying Scotsman, but also details how we discovered he had dyspraxia, what implications that had for his life and his education, and how it's affected his life in general. So Travellos to Trainland, and you can buy that on Amazon.
Amazing. Thank you. So my name is Crystal Bella. I am the founder of Dyspraxia magazine, but I also created the book Dyspraxia Journal, which is only available to buy through Dyspraxia magazine itself. The idea behind this was to have a number of activities that help people kind of build their confidence and feel a bit more positive about their dyspraxia, just through a number of kind of fun activities that they can do that are really silly. You can kind of destroy the book a little bit and do all sorts of things like that. So that's my book. So thank you all so much for joining us today. It's really, really wonderful to have such a large selection of writers who've all kind of dedicated writing to dyspraxia, with it being a condition that's so less known compared to other conditions. Having writings about it is so important, and it's great that we've got a selection of books for children, young adults, adults in the workplace, more kind of scientific-y as well. It's really, really great to have that variety. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about the process of writing books. So hopefully, if we do have any aspiring writers watching us today, hopefully this will bring you some inspiration to kind of give you that push to finally start writing, whether that's about dyspraxia or something else entirely. So the first question I have today for our writers is, what prompted you to write about dyspraxia? What was that first push that kind of went, "Do you know what, I'm going to start writing about this"? Who would like to go first?
I don't mind going first.
Sure.
So, like I said, my book is about my son who has dyspraxia, and so the book is about his experience starting secondary school, which happened 4 years ago now. And that first week, he was coming home and losing something in school every single day. And at the time, I was just like, oh my gosh, Luca, his name is Luca. I was like, I'm going to write a book about this. And he was like, yeah, okay, mum. Yeah, whatever. Didn't believe me at all. Typical teenager. And I was like, no, I am. You know, we need to raise awareness of dyspraxia. And what the aim of the book is to highlight some of the lesser known difficulties of dyspraxia. So a lot of people who don't know much about dyspraxia associate it with the clumsy child, or mainly coordination issues. But there's so much more to it. And I wanted to focus on something, like I said, the lesser known difficulties, one of which was self-organizing. And the fine motor skills. So yeah, I made that comment when he started school, and it took 4 years. 4 years later, I was like, right, I've now got the time. I'm going to do it, Luca. And he was like, yeah, okay. He still didn't believe me. And it was one half term when I had time off work with the kids, and we didn't have a particularly busy week. I was like, okay, I might actually do this. So I just started jotting things down, remembering that first week and what he lost and the difficulties had buttoning up his shirts, and with his like trousers, shoelaces undone. And so I just got some ideas down on paper, and I got my daughter involved, who's quite artistic. And I was like, oh, what do you think? We need to make a character of Luca and a character of Mum, which was myself. And yeah, and so well, I know we're going to talk about the process of publishing later, but yeah, that's what prompted me. It was a comment 4 years ago that I said, yeah, I'm going to do a book about this, but it did take 4 years to find the time to get it done. And yes, and now I've published.
Amazing. I love hearing that.
If nobody wants to, I can jump in now.
Sure.
If everybody else is thinking. Yeah. So I wrote Neurodiversity in the Workplace, and it was kind of an accident. I didn't kind of mean to write a book this year, but I kind of did. So this book is inspired on a lot of negative experiences that I've previously had at work, and then the kind of I've more recently had a bit more of a positive experience at work in terms of having a line manager who understands me, supports me, kind of listened and was able to put things in place for me to be like my best self and sort of to, I guess, thrive at work. And so I wanted to write. It's written. It's using my lived experiences, but it also uses kind of like data and research as well within the book, and it's kind of, but also kind of top like tips about how to create sort of inclusive workplaces and looking at systemic inclusion, and that you can design workplaces without people having to disclose as soon as they start a job, and you can have put things in place. You can, in terms of universal design, you can create workplaces that are inclusive of everybody, whether they're neurodivergent or not, or dyspraxic or not. And it's not difficult. It's not going to break the bank of most organisations to foster inclusion in the workplace and make feel safe. And I felt because of my negative experiences work in the past, I didn't have that. And then I met a line manager who was wonderful and she was fantastic. And I was like, actually, I need to write about this. And it ended up being a book. I wrote a guide. That was my first thing that I did, and then I had COVID. That was the other thing. So I had COVID, and I was really, really bored. So I've got ADHD, and I don't do well when I'm not allowed to like do anything, or like, so I had to self-isolate. So I started writing it when I had COVID, and I just carried on. But yeah, so being bored and having ADHD and COVID was possibly part of it too. But yeah, I'm very proud of the achievement, being able to kind of get it out there.
I love that. The almost accidentally wrote a whole book. That's such a great story to tell. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, my story with that is very, very similar. I knew I wanted to write about my dyspraxia for a while because the best way I found to help people understand it was to use that tool of storytelling and to use that as a way to help people understand dyspraxia. So I basically one day decided I'm just going to try writing one chapter. And I had these years upon years of documents to work off of, from journal entries I did to help myself just develop the language and the vocabulary to understand my dyspraxia better, but also all the various paperwork that my parents had from the whole process that they went through to get my diagnosis. So that was very much where it all started. And it was a 2-year-long process that started with just me in my flat. And then I had a wonderful mentor who helped me figure out what was relevant to telling the larger picture of explaining dyspraxia. And then it started to be handed off to writing groups and things like that. And then eventually I started querying and went from there.
Amazing. Kim, I'd wonder if you'd be able to share with us a bit more.
Yeah, so I've written for a very long time. I started writing stories when I was about 7, 8, 9 years old. I always had an obsession with books as a child, and I was obsessed with language, reading. I always had a book in my hand from a very young age, and I started writing stories when I was about 9, 10 years old, and I just kind of kept going. But it was always a hobby. I never thought it would be anything more than a hobby. And then a couple of people started saying to me, you should try and get published. You should try and actually write a book and get it out there. And it was always one of those things that, oh, I would love to do that, but I never knew where to start. I would never have, someone like me can't write a book. Why would anyone want to read anything that I've written? But then I read a book when I was 16 called Caged in Chaos by an author called Victoria Biggs, who is also dyspraxic. And I thought, it opened my eyes really to the fact that you need to hear about other people's lived experience, because there's only so much you can get from textbooks and from medical jargon. You need to know that other people are going through the same thing. And then I was approached with just a little over a year ago now, I think. And when the publisher first approached me, I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a hoax account, and said, I work for Live Places Publishing, and I would love for you to write about your dyspraxia for me. And I had just sent him a message because I thought he looked interesting. I thought his content looked very interesting. I didn't at that point actually realize he was a publisher, so that was a very happy accident.
I love that. Amazing. Terry, what's your experience of starting to write about dyspraxia?
Well, we'd come back from a 15-day holiday in England and Scotland. Like I said, we got up to the west coast of England and the east coast of England and the west coast of Scotland. And when I got back, I was at a bit of a loose end. He'd gone back to his mum's, and I started writing. And I think it didn't take so long to write. It took about 2 or 3 months, but it's taken about 18 months to get it into some kind of shape and publish it. And I think probably what I learned was that the best thing to do is start. If you want to write, is just to start. And I would probably say start on a computer, because then you can edit, and it's easy to go back and change it. And then having got some kind of idea, then is to give it to trusted people to get it to get their feedback, and then start changing it around as to how you want to present the narrative, what sort of thread you want to put through it. And the reason that dyspraxia became part of the book was because it was part of his life, and I wanted to show it in a really positive way, that it didn't hold him back at all. Difficulties could be overcome, and he's quite delightful and in his own way, but a bit differently abled, I think, is what I'd say.
Amazing. That kind of brings me on to our next topic of, do you have a writing schedule? How did you plan that around your other commitments? Terry, I know you've just mentioned that you kind of wrote it within 3 months before then the 18-month process of kind of getting it more ready. Could you share a bit more about that?
Yes, I wrote probably 2 or 3 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week. I found if I wrote too much, it would get stale. It was best to leave it and then let it sit for a bit, then come back to it. I'm not the kind of person that wanted to write for 2 hours every morning like some people do. I guess what suits other people didn't really suit me. So I just plowed on, I think, and just put it in. And the end result was very different to what I wrote. And I think that's another thing I would say, is that you write down what you think and what you believe and what you hope for, and then you just see at the end what is the core, what is the best way to present what you want to present, I think. And it may be different to how you first put it down on paper or
That's really
on a
interesting.
computer.
I wonder about anyone else. What kind of process did you have? Was it like a much longer, or was it a similar kind of approach?
It's really just about. Oh, sorry.
Go on, you go. You go. Fine. Go.
Yeah. For me, I'm a freelancer as well, so a lot is really just about dividing up my time. So my typical approach is more so about dividing up the time as I'll be like, okay, well, Wednesday will be the just writing the book day, whereas Thursday and Friday will be the admin for clients / doing the client work / doing the calls. It's more just, for me, it's more just a process of figuring out what time works.
Yeah, I'll just jump in now. In terms of like scheduling, I didn't have a schedule. Well, I wrote my book on top of working a full-time job as well, which is a lot of people do. So part of me is like, how did I actually manage to create this thing on top of working full-time too? But I didn't have a schedule as such in terms of the writing. I kind of just did it, and then eventually somehow I had like a book. I guess I did sort of make sure that I had like sort of a few hours that I might have done in the evening after work to get it down, and I had a vague plan in terms of my chapters headings of knowing what I kind of wanted to include. But I think in terms of like having a schedule, I think for me, post publication in terms of the marketing of the book has been more important for me to kind of like to keep the momentum going, keep people talking about inclusion at work, keep stuff going out, having a schedule there, and reaching out to organisations and employers and getting talks and things about my book. So I felt like there is obviously, to write the book, you need some kind of plan, but afterwards as well, it's kind of, and I think people don't tend to think about the marketing until a lot later down the line. But I think it's really important to kind of have the two and have a bit of a plan of what you're going to do sort of on publication day, but then afterwards as well, and then as the months go on too.
I think for me, trying to get a writing schedule down was at the same time the easiest bit and the worst bit, because I could sit down and write for a couple of hours, but then look back and then have to refine it. So I thought if I only write for 20 minutes at a time. This was actually a tip from a friend. If I write for 20 minutes at a time, stop, get away from the computer, go out for a break, and then come back and start again. Because I think if you're kind of almost looking at the screen and almost willing the words to appear, you just frustrate yourself. You don't get anywhere. So sometimes you've got to take that 5 minutes and come back to it, because I find if you just sit there when you've got no ideas, it almost compounds it in a way.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying there. I think others might potentially agree with that as well. Because if you're staring at a screen and you're kind of going, right, brain, words, keyboard, and it's just not going to happen. So yeah,
you have to get out. You have to divide up that time. You have to, not all day. Otherwise, it's terrible for your creativity and it's terrible for your health. You need that sense of nature and that sense of moving your legs.
Did you feel any extra pressure because you were working for a publisher to work and produce the book? Did that was something that weighed on you in any way?
Sorry.
I would say I was given for my first one a decent timeline. I was given it was about a year or so once I signed the contract, and I think that was, for me, that was enough. But I was always aware of that deadline, and I always felt like I had to not to take on too much freelance work so that I didn't information overload myself.
Yeah, so okay.
Nadia, what was your writing schedule like for your one?
Yeah, so my children's book doesn't have that much text in it. So it didn't take too long to get the story down. Like I said, it was in my head from his experience. But the fiddly bit with mine was the illustrations, and the story is very much told through the illustrations. So working with my illustrator, it was a lot of to-ing and fro-in and like, no, that's not right, and the shoelaces need to be undone on that page. And so I worked full time, so I was just kind of like emailing back and forth in the evenings and having Teams calls in the evenings when I could. And I had a really good illustrator. She was fantastic, and she was very accommodating to when I could meet with her and send things back for editing. So yeah, that's kind of what I did. Like I said, I started it in a half term when I had the week off with the kids. And then it was just kind of to and fro and getting those illustrations right, making sure the text was correct with just emails back and forth. It was a good process, but it was like, yeah, it took about 4 to 5 months, and then it was ready for publishing.
Wow, amazing. Thank you. That brings us on to our next question about getting published. So going from, right, here's these amazing ideas, put them down on paper or keyboard, the next bit is getting the book out there. So when looking for a publisher or something around publishing, what did you look for? I wondered if Rosemary, if you could start with this one.
Yeah, I queried over 90 different publishers and agents when I was first in the querying trenches, so to speak. And the thing that narrowed it down in terms of who was a terrible fit versus who was great is I queried at a time where people were really trying on the diversity and inclusion angle, which is fantastic, don't get me wrong. But the thing is, I felt at times people had the wrong intentions with that. They were looking for, there was some, unfortunately, that were looking at that too tokenistic. So for me, what helped narrow it down once I actually had to choose from was basically who was actually informed on neurodiversity, who had experience working with neurodiverse writers, and who wasn't in it just because they wanted to look good.
Alice, would you say you had a similar experience with that?
Yeah, so I was looking at the ethics as well. I wanted to go with a publisher. So I went with Cherished Editions eventually, who are part of Trigger Publishing. And I wanted a publisher that had similar ethics to me, understood neurodivergence, but also mental health. And I really like that. So 25% of the sales of my book goes to Sure Mind Foundation, the mental health charity. So I really like that there was that part of sort of the publishing kind of process as well, that I was sort of supporting a charity. But yeah, definitely, I think that I looked at a few different publishers, but I settled on one that had like my kind of ethics, and I knew would, and I looked at other books that they'd published as well. I think that's a really good tip. Have a look and see what else they're kind of but getting out there, and see if your book will fit on a bookshelf with other similar books that they've published. And I think that's really good, kind of gives you a good idea of if your book will fit what they want. And I think with publishing, it's always about like what they want. They've got an image, they've got an idea of what they want and what will sell, and they know what sells in terms of what. I mean, your book might sell well with a different publisher, but one publisher might say that it wouldn't sell for their specific, I guess, their image and their kind of target audience as well. So yeah, definitely, I think that ethics was really important, and having that understanding of neurodivergence. But also, I think in terms of like cover design and things like that. So I was very specific about, I didn't want a negative. I didn't want my cover to be very like negative looking, I guess, or like kind of that, because I want, it's a positive book. It's about inclusion in the workplace, but it's positive. It's about positive experiences and things that I've learned from negative experiences. So I wanted my cover to reflect that, and I wanted it to be very intersectional as well. Um, and they had a really good understanding when I talked to them about different imagery and different images I liked. They totally got it, and I think some publishers might not have got that. So yeah, so I think it's really important just to have a think about the bigger picture and the whole package as well, when you're looking at publishers and getting out to kind of publish a book.
Kim, your publisher reached out to you, which is a really great experience. But did you have any kind of similarities with looking at others at all, or were they just kind of like the perfect people to reach out to you?
At that point, I actually, when my publisher first got in touch with me, my first step was frantic Googling, because I genuinely thought someone was having a laugh. It took about a week to get back to him initially, because I thought it was a joke. But then, as it kind of became apparent that this was genuine, this message had come from my editor, I kind of had a look at his social media. I Googled his name, as you do, and it came up that he is a neurodiversity professor. So this was someone who understood neurodiversity, who clearly had an interest in it, was clearly knew, the challenges that we face, and, was going to be someone who was going to present it in a very positive light. So I was very, very hopeful, and that was when I decided, yeah, because you're not going to, because I think sometimes some publishers can almost, it's almost a temptation to, not paint it negatively exactly, but paint disability as something to be overcome, when it's part of who we are. It's not something that you kind of can shove in a box. It's something that has to be embraced as part of you, rather than go unaddressed. And I think they did a brilliant job of that.
That's amazing. That's really positive. Nadia, what's your experience on this?
So I self-published. So for me, the finding the right illustrator was the important bit for me. I wanted the right sort of images, the right characters. So I kind of researched children's book illustrators and had a look at a few, and then I found Danny. So I researched what other books she'd produced and illustrated for, and yeah, it was the right fit. I really liked her style. I was like, I could see my son as a character in her book. So when I contacted her to have a first initial Teams chat, we got along really well. She really understood why I wanted to make the book, and she was really interested. So for me, it was meeting the right illustrator, because that is a big part of my book, is told through the illustrations.
Terry, you're self-published. Did you look at publishers at any point, or did you always have kind of in mind that you wanted to self-publish?
I think I probably always had in mind just to self-publish, and I perhaps some of that was it's the first thing I've ever published, so it was maybe a lack of self-confidence or lack of wanting to send the work off to a stranger and then have it rejected, as you hear so many times, 99 rejections before you get an acceptance. So I really admire Kim for getting a request to do a book. That's fantastic. So I decided to do it myself. I decided to do most of it myself, and it was a pretty steep learning curve. And I realized there was a lot more to it than I realized. Even though Amazon makes it pretty easy, there's still a fairly steep learning curve to get through, especially if you don't understand MS Word to any degree. And I found that was one of the hardest things, was getting MS Word in the correct format to translate through to a book and publishing. And then, of course, you've got photographs, the front page, and all that kind of thing as well. So there was a lot to it. And I think having done all that, I only published it about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and I picked up when I came to England. I think I told you I went to England recently. I've only just got back, so it's 2 a.m. over here. So I bought back 30 books, and to my horror, there's no page numbers. So the chapters have page numbers, but the pages don't have numbers. So if you do it yourself, you're responsible for all the mistakes as well. So that's something else to bear in mind, and that needs to be corrected, obviously. But
so I think that leads us into kind of the pros and cons, the benefits of deciding between self-publishing and publishing. So when I created Dyspraxia Journal, I was in talks with a publisher who, said that they really wanted to publish my book, same publisher as Rosemary. And, I'd done my background checks on them. They'd done their background checks on me. They were really keen to get involved. But I had a slightly negative issue where my editor just kind of ghosted me one day, and I was told that they were on holiday and they'd get back to me. And then months and months later, they told me they'd gone on maternity leave. And I wouldn't be hearing from them for like a year. And at that point, I was really frustrated, and I just wanted to get the book out, because the idea with my book is that it would be an annual thing. So every year I'd produce a new version of it. And so I decided at that time that I was just going to self-publish, get it out there, and sell it on my own website. I'm very privileged to have the Dyspraxia magazine website to be able to do that. I've already got the store set up. And as you said, you are completely responsible for everything that's in there, making the front cover, making the spine, which is something I'd forgotten about. So the spine on my book doesn't have anything on it. Let me double check. No, there's nothing on the spine. Something that had completely passed me when I first did the first draft of my book. Half the pages were on one side and half the pages were on the other, instead of being like fluent with one another. So it took me a while to get that. And thankfully, the company I used were very, very good at guiding me. And I didn't end up publishing to Amazon because I found that their prices were really high and they take quite a high percentage, which I didn't feel great about. And because I already had the website from Dyspraxia magazine, I didn't really need Amazon, but it does also mean that I don't get the footfall that Amazon does. That's the other major benefit of Amazon. Yes, they take a commission, but you're going to get a lot more sales. So I had to weigh that up for mine. I don't know if anyone else had any thought processes between, do I self-publish or do I go for a publisher?
well, it would be nice to hand over everything to a publisher and say, here you are,
Mm.
and then set the date, and I'll turn up and sign a few books. That'd be great. But I don't suppose it happens like that. But it would be fantastic. I mean, I'd struggled so much. Luckily, my brother's in IT, and he helped me. and guided me. But it was a steep learning curve that I started at the bottom, and I'm hopeful if I ever publish a second one, it's a bit easier. But as I went with Amazon because at the end of the day, it was easier, I think.
I think for me it was like I don't know. I think the idea of self-publishing terrified me a little bit because you have to like take on the editing and all of the cover design and all the things and remembering to put stuff on your spine. And I didn't even know that. Yeah, I only knew about that because my publisher told me that they were like designing my spine. And I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, no. So I think like I said before, like I didn't intend to write a book, but then I kind of did. But I think for me it was like having another person to tell me, right, I need you to check these edits, or I've put this in track changes, tell me, or we need some more research here, can you edit this comment, or whatever it is. And I think that was nice. That kind of kept me on track. I know also had so when I right at the beginning of the process, my publisher sent me like a publishing schedule, so I knew when to expect the copy edits back, when to get the brief for my cover design. Everything was laid out all the way up to publication. And I think if you're the neurodivergent, if you're dyspraxic, we all like routine, we all like structure, and we all like to know what's coming up and what's going to come next. And I think that helped my brain. I guess if you self-publish, you could probably just write that yourself, maybe, and that would maybe be a kind of a prompt. And people do write lots of lists for lots and lots of things. But I think it worked really well with my brain. And in terms of like having somebody, and it's that accountability. And I think I'm not very good. I'm very good if I have a deadline in front of me, I tend to meet it because I know it's there. But if I don't necessarily have a deadline, like if I say to myself, I'm going to publish a book at some point in the future, I might do bits and pieces, but then I'll get distracted, and then I'll go and down a rabbit hole of whatever another thing that I'm doing, and then I'll remember like sort of a few months down the line, oh yes, I was writing a book. But if I have a deadline, if I have a structure, I'm more likely to achieve things and do things because my brain is kind of, yeah, I guess it's like the way my brain works and way my brain wired is kind of like, I like that sort of that threat of having to meet a deadline.
I can definitely relate to that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm used to it as a freelancer. I've been freelancing for a while, and before that, a lot of my more formal education training meant that like I am used to always having someone bouncing off constructive criticism, and also you have to have this done by this day, and there's no negotiation to it. And so I think it's mostly a personal preference thing in terms of working with traditional publishers. But the thing is, the big con is by having a little bit of a team working with you on some of the bits and pieces, you have to be really, really patient because everything takes so much time. And you can be between one step and the other, you can be waiting like months. And in terms of the first step, just even signing the contract, that was a year, but as you went through the process, months.
Yeah, I think things taking a long time is clearly where I then went, you know what, self-publish.
Fair enough.
I think though, I don't know if that at the same time it makes you anxious and it reassures you because it's in your head you're going, this is taking time, so they must be going through it all. They must be really serious about making a decision, but at the same time, they must be thinking awful things. What if they reject me? They're laughing at me. They're reading this and they're laughing at me. And you've got absolutely nothing to back that up. But when you're not getting the communication, that was kind of where my head started going to begin with. Until, I mean, my editor is such a lovely, patient man, and he's like, no, Kimberley, I love what you've done. I love your work. I love your writing. He was so vocal about giving me that feedback because he knew I would kind of sit and ruminate otherwise, which which was lovely.
Amazing. One of the things that as writers we sometimes quite come across and need to be aware of is avoiding exploitation. Because sometimes if you're vocal online about writing a book and things like that, you'll get various people who will reach out to you and be like, I'm a publisher, I can publish your book, it'll cost you this much, this is how much money you need to give me and we'll do this. Or I think Alice mentioned that, you know, some publishers can sometimes be a bit tokenistic with the writers that they take on, which can feel like being exploited sometimes. So what kind of checks can others who are aspiring to be writers look out for to prevent being exploited like that? I wondered if anyone had any kind of thoughts on that specifically.
The first thing I can recommend is a forum by the name of Writers Beware. It is an anonymous forum where writers from all over the world post about their experiences working with authors, sorry, not authors, working with publishers. And that can be a very useful thing to look at. It's not perfect, but because you're relying on just random volunteers sharing their opinions. But the one way to work around that is to reach out to other authors on social media who you see on the websites and the social media and everything else, and just ask them what their experience is like. That's become quite normal for me these days. I will occasionally get Instagram messages from people who are thinking of querying JKP. And they say, oh yeah, how was your experiences? And I'm more than happy to share that.
I think,
Yeah,
Rosemary, did I not reach out to you when I was considering my proposal? I'm sure I sent you a message.
Something like that? I think so, yeah.
Because I think when you recognize a name in the space, it's reassuring.
Yeah, that's so important.
Yeah, I think just kind of adding on from that as well, I think, well, is that sort of, I think a community is really good, like reaching out to people around you, different communities online, but there's also a Facebook group called the Empowered Author Facebook group, the Empowered Author. If you just sort of search that, it'll come up, and they're really helpful, and they've got lots of advice, both like pre-publication, post-publication, and they're all, some of them are newer authors, some of them have written lots of books, they have lots of advice. There's also different communities. So I'm involved in a writer space at New Writing North, and there will be other, I'm not sure about worldwide things, but there will be equivalents, I'm sure, of different writing communities as well. And it's really important just to kind of chat to people and kind of, and I think especially in terms of like topic of dyspraxia or like ADHD or neurodivergence, everybody, you're writing because it means something to you, and it's not it's not fiction, it's not it's not a story that you've made up in your head. It's real life, and it's really kind of personal. It can be quite and you need to be sort of careful in terms of making sure that you don't trigger yourself, that you don't cause yourself more trauma by talking about traumatic events, and that you've got those safeguards in place as well. And for all of that to happen, you have to have a publisher who really kind of takes your well-being into consideration as well when they're writing books. And I think that's really hard to know. It's like a workplace. You don't know if your workplace is going to be. You can look at policies online and like all the things to make sure that they're inclusive and supportive. But until you're actually there, you don't really know if that's going to be put into practice. So it is kind of, I guess, hard to know that publisher is going to support you until you're actually there and you're writing your book. But I guess, yeah, like others have said, speaking to other people, I don't think. I didn't really tell many people I'd written a book. It was kind of a secret because I didn't think it was true. Like, I didn't think it was real until like I saw the contract in front of me. And I was like, yeah, maybe I should tell like my friends and things. I didn't tell anybody. So I sent a few texts. I was like, just to let you know, before it goes like online, I've done this thing. But yeah, just kind of look after yourself and make sure you take care of yourself in that kind of process too. Because there's only one of you. You've got to look after your brain.
I think there's a lot of people that want to make money out of self-publishing authors, mainly because I think we all suffer from anxiety working on our own. If it's the first or second book, we don't have any experience about what to expect. There's a lot of people who would claim they can increase your profile and what keywords to use and things like that. I get a lot of that advertising in my inbox. And I think that's something to be aware of too. And some quite expensive courses as well. But by the same token, sometimes you just have to pay for education. You've got to pay to learn, and you can't necessarily begrudge that. And I'm interested those those authors who have publishers. Did you actually get a lawyer to look at your contracts? Did you take any further, or did you just sign the contract, or how did you approach the contract when it came? Did you look at it and get a legal opinion as to what it was? Is that something you did, or you just signed?
I was lucky enough to have the professional connection of knowing someone who works in the film and theater industry, and their agent did me a favor and got some of the people within their legal department to take a really quick look at the contract. Okay. And that was really useful to make sure that nothing appeared abnormal in terms of what they're used to seeing.
Yeah, sure. And you guys, did you do the same, or did you just? I mean,
I probably should have.
I don't know what I would have done.
I was hoping for the best. Yeah, no, okay. I probably should have looked into the contract more. It turned out okay, but yeah, I think I did ask my publisher for some clarification of words that I didn't quite understand. I did do that, but yeah, I probably should have. Looking back, maybe it's fine, but yeah, I think a lot of people get really excited and sign things, which is kind of what I did. I think I was I was in that kind of mindset of, oh, is this really real? Without but it's probably good advice not to do what I did, even though what I did was fine.
That worked out
in the end.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad it worked out. Yeah. No, yeah. So
I kind of went through mine. I went through mine on my own, but there was a lot. There was some terminology I did not understand. So I basically handed it to my dad and said, I don't know what any of these terms mean, help me. and luckily my dad's business means he knows some of the terminology, and we were able to find some of his connections who knew what this meant and were able to kind of break it down to such a point that I understood it. So I was very, very lucky.
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't do anything with my contract. I guess contract with Amazon. I just went ahead and published. So I didn't take any legal advice either. And looking back, maybe I should have. But I mean, Amazon is so big. I assume, rightly or wrongly, they would be okay. Much like yourself, that things would be okay.
I mean, when I was so I originally did have a publisher on board. And they were very keen for me to stick with them, and when I was kind of saying to them, like, I might kind of depart and just do this separately, they were quite upset by that, but they just weren't able to meet my expectations of not telling me that my editor was on holiday, and then not telling me that they were going on maternity leave and I wouldn't hear from them for a year. That kind of, I lost a bit of trust with that. But I had other publishers that reached out to me and they shared their contracts with me. I've got family members who have run their own business for as long as I've been alive. So I had them read through those contracts with me, and I think we went through 3 in total. One of them was Amazon, and we were kind of reading through them, and these were the types of publishers so there's different types of publishing. One where you get a payment at the end, and then there are ones where you have to make a payment to them. And these other publishers outside of the main one, they wanted me to pay a contribution of like £600 to £1,000, which would have covered the cost of registering I think it's called the ISBN, which is the barcode, and the book code. There's loads of codes involved. So there's a cost to that, and printing and distribution and things like that. And I was reading through, and me and my family kind of decided, well, we're paying a lot of money for something that we could do ourselves. We could pay extra, and yes, they would do it for us, but they don't have much of a backlog. They don't have much of a category or catalogue at all of books. So, you know, do we really want to go with them? And as we were reading through Amazon, there was just lots of fees involved. And, you know, I kind of went, well, if I go with Amazon, I get the foot flow, I'm going to get more sales. And so as a result, you know, it will reach out to more people. But again, because it was something I wanted to do yearly, and by this point I'd kind of lost my enthusiasm for it because I'd been kind of thrown backwards and forward and messed around a little bit, that I kind of just wanted to get it out there and then not have to think about it again. So I literally, that's kind of the process I take. So from start to finish, for me, it was, you know, reaching out to publishers, lots of various different publishers, being put on hold for almost a year with nothing happening, me being frustrated and then just doing it myself. But I'm keen to know what others' process was. I know we've kind of mentioned it. I think, Rosemary, you said you reached out to an awful lot of publishers at first. What was the process like in between that, from reaching out to them to finally and then after publishing?
There was a really long wait. So I would just schedule a certain amount of time in any given week to research agents and publishers I'm thinking of reaching out to. And then I would wait a while, and then like a long while, like sometimes even months. And then I would finally hear back from people. I would use tools like Submittable and other similar tools to that, sometimes email, where I always get very opinionated and iffy about this whole process is I don't feel like it's accessible enough, in a sense that when you look at some of these query platforms, they have very rigid instructions that are very like vague, very like, I like the following TV shows, I like the following music, figure out what that means in terms of my case. And everybody has their own opinions of wanting certain font sizes, how long they want a query to be, how they want the attachment to be. And you have to follow those instructions, and they use that process as a way to narrow down who they're going to go with. But they also look at it in terms of taste, which is completely random.
Do you think their process then, Rosemary, isn't specific enough?
Yeah, it's very vague. I think that's where a lot of neurodivergent writers who go through that process really struggle, because what they would say in defense would be what you have to do is look at our books and read our books first. But when you're querying a lot of people and you're also trying to work and you also have other commitments, it's not always possible to look at that in as much detail as you would like.
Yeah, and I think, Kim, what you were saying earlier as well is that when you're in that waiting period and, you know, you're relying on them to reach out to you and there's just no communication, that anxiety really sits in.
I think where you kind of need someone that, I mean, doesn't necessarily need to know, you know, blow by blow exactly how neurodivergence affects you, but that fear of rejection and that fear of, do people agree with what I'm writing? Do people like what I'm writing? Do they think I can write? Is very, very real. And I think when you're in that waiting period, you've like poured your soul into this thing for months, and then someone, the very thought of someone criticizing it is terrifying. And to people who don't write about lived experience, that maybe sounds really dramatic, but when you're writing about your own life, it's different.
Yeah.
I agree. I think everybody probably on this panel agrees with that. But like, that kind of fear of rejection, I think as neurodivergent people, as dyspraxic people, we tend to feel like that intense fear of, have I done something wrong? Am I a failure? And like, we kind of catastrophize everything. Everything's bigger than it actually is. and that is the terrifying kind of thing. Oh well, especially you're not right. Like I've written about sort of positive and negative experiences at work, and we're all writing about our own experiences, and putting yourself out there for somebody else to judge. So they're judging your experiences. They're judging if what you've written about yourself is worthy of other people reading, which is a very big thing. And I think, I just think that kind of idea that like, you're worried about somebody else reading your words and what they're going to think, as well. So definitely, I agree with that.
I always kind of thought, are people going to think I'm being dramatic? Because so my main symptom of my dyspraxia is my memory. I mean, is probably the thing that gives me the most problems day to day. But you'll get people who look and go, well, everyone forgets. And it's, well, yes, everyone does forget, but not to the extent that dyspraxics do. And it's trying to get people to understand that, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I find that as well. So when my book is about Luca losing things in school, he loses his tie, he loses lunchbox, he loses PE kit every day. And that worry went through my head as well. It was like, well, what if parents are going to read this and think, oh, well, my child loses things in school. Are they dyspraxic? And that was my big worry. And I was like, well, no, that's not the point. I was just, this is my son's experience. I just want to highlight some of the other difficulties. And then, I put into the story about the fine motor skills as well. So it is quite daunting. It is quite scary. And it's my first time. I only self-published a couple of months ago now, back in June. But and sorry, my internet is gone in and out and I've been connection is lost. But what I wanted to say about the self-publishing, I liked having the control, and just being able to go on sort of my time scale, and when I can chase my illustrator and when I'm ready. And getting it out on Amazon was a big thing. It's really fiddly. I know, Terry, you mentioned things like that, the layout, and especially mine, because it has a lot of illustrations. And I learned so much while doing it, about the bleed. What's the bleed
Absolutely,
on the book? It's another world. It's very fiddly, but worthwhile. And I'm glad I chose Amazon KDP. I'm quite enjoying the process.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing is the first person you give it to. I think actually, and it doesn't really matter who that is, but the first person you give it to. And after that, your heart gets a bit harder, I think, and you can deal with more people looking at it and sort of making suggestions and things like that. But the first person you give it to is terrifying. Look, I'd agree with that entirely. Yeah.
Amazing. Before we move over to the Q&A section, if anyone watching does have any questions for our writers, now is the perfect time to pop them in the chat. Don't feel like you have to share questions in, but if you do have those burning questions, do share them. I've got one more question for our writers, is that once your book was published, whether you were self-published or with a publisher, what kind of happened after that? I guess if you were published, how did your publishers support you? And if you're self-published, how did you, I guess, support yourself about getting that out there, the advertisements and things? I wondered if Alice, you could start this one.
Yeah, I was actually going to sort of suggest that I had things in my head to say. But so I was very lucky that a lot of publishers aren't necessarily, in terms of the kind of post-publication stuff, aren't as necessarily organised in that kind of area. But so I had for my book. So I worked with a really fantastic PR company called Literally PR, who are lovely, who are really, really supportive, and they're wonderful. And they really kind of kickstarted that kind of marketing kind of covered a lot of I have quite a comment head anyway, so I did a lot myself. I'd do a lot of my own marketing too. And so having that working with Literary PR meant that I eventually, and we were talking about kind of other opportunities after, I think somebody sort of said a lot of paying for support and things. So they ran a course, so a 10-week author branding course through the PR company who I met through my publisher. So I wouldn't have met them otherwise. And they were brilliant. So it was 10 weeks, and there was 10 C's of author branding, and there was a different topic every week. And I met other authors from up and down the country, across the world, and we got together every week on Zoom to talk about author branding and share techniques and tips and what's going well, not what's not going well, and that it's really important for everybody to have a website, and it's really important to have some proper photos and all the things that come with marketing a book as well, that I think you don't necessarily think about. So I think, yeah, my publisher kind of was a springboard to that, to other support and other things and other opportunities as well. So yeah, definitely, I think that it's really important to think about that bigger picture, as I said before. And yeah, so I was lucky in that the marketing, and that I had a bit of kind of expertise and kind of knowledge myself as well, that not everybody does have. So I think that probably kind of put me in good stead to be able to do a lot of that work too. But yeah, definitely, I think having that PR company and just somebody to just say, yeah, that's good. They had a look at my LinkedIn and tweak my bio on my LinkedIn to like put my book further up and things like that. So they look at like sort of all those finer details, because essentially at the end of the day, we want people to buy our books. I want people to buy my book, but also I want people to learn from it. And I wanted to get into organisations and businesses, so I've been doing lots of talks and other things to kind of get out there and be able to, because I want change. I want sort of workplaces to become more inclusive and more understanding of our talents and what we can offer. So yeah, so I think it's kind of like a bit campaigny as well. That's kind of the tack that I've gone in.
Love that. Very insightful. Thank you. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add to that at all?
I think it's when it's in the workplace, because there are so many organizations that just, some of them have good intentions, some of them just don't have any idea. And I don't know whether, I'm not convinced it's always malicious, but there seems to be just a sense of we don't know where to start. And, talk to neurodiverse people. There's no shortage of us out there. There's neurodiverse writers, neurodiverse speakers. If you want to know about dyspraxia, there's so many resources, so many dyspraxic writers, so many dyspraxic speakers. Speak to us. Actually say, you know what, we would love to be more inclusive. Where have you experienced problems in the workplace? Where have you experienced discrimination? Where have you experienced issues maybe getting into a certain role or getting an interview? Where have you experienced the problems and how can we fix them? That's the questions they need to be asking, and most of them just don't.
That's a very good point there. We've got a question that's come in from the audience, and then we shall call it an evening. But yeah, thank you for everyone who's joining today as the audience and our wonderful panel members. So this question's come in from Mary. Do you guys have any inspirations for writing or any favourite authors? That's a good question. Who would like to go first?
Oh, I'll go first.
Sure.
Yeah. So for me, that would be everything from the contemporary disabled writer and activist, Alice Wong. I recommend looking up things like her memoir, Year of the Tiger, to I studied a lot of Sylvia Plath in university, and that dramatically changed my whole opinion on neurological conditions and mental health treatment as a whole. And even Billy Childish, the punk musician and poet, he's dyslexic. So he writes from this incredible lens of unfiltered dyslexic ways of writing and thinking, and tells you about his life and his experiences.
Amazing. I think for me, for the Dyspraxia Journal, my inspiration came from many years ago. There were some YouTubers who made, I believe, what was called the Wreck-It Journal. and it had a similar idea where you use this journal. There are some pages where you might be expected to rip them out, paint them, and tear it up a little bit, throw it across the room, kind of thing. And I wanted something that was really silly and lighthearted, but was aimed specifically at people with coordination issues. Quite often we hear that we're messy and we're uncaring, and so I wanted something that could really hone in on that, so that we could kind of take back our own narratives on that. So that's kind of where my inspiration came from.
I think mine came from my son, definitely, and I think it's dyspraxia and love of trains. So having something personal that inspires you and is close to your heart, I think, makes it easier to write. And really, it doesn't matter what you do with it after you write it. I mean, I know it's nice for other people to read it, and it's great to make money, but at the end of the day, I mean, maybe it's a foolish attitude, but just writing it is a real positive thing, I think, real positive achievement. And to actually publish a book is a wonderful thing, and I would encourage anybody that has. Everyone's told that everyone's got a book inside them, and I think if that's true, sit down in front of a computer, sit down in front of pen and paper, and just start. And that's where it begins, with the first word in the beginning, and that's where it starts. So do it, just do it.
Very well said, Terry. I would definitely agree. I mean, Nadia, I guess potentially you've got a similar experience there with your son. Would you say that's where your inspiration comes from as well?
Yes, definitely. So my inspiration is my son. I just wanted to share his experience, share his story, and be his voice, really, just to say, look, this is what I have difficulties with. This is me. But yeah, it's a great achievement, I think, to write a book and share an experience. I really enjoyed it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us this evening. It's been a really wonderful, insightful conversation, especially, as I said earlier, with dyspraxia being kind of one of the lesser known neurodivergent conditions. It's really important to have writers out there who are publishing books, whether that's self-published or through a publisher. It can be extremely daunting throughout the whole process of various different ways that you can do that, and as Terry says, it all starts with one word. Just get it down, get the first words down, and then the other ones will flow. And as Kim and Rosemary were saying earlier, make sure you take your breaks as well. Don't try and force it all out in one go. It can take 3 months, it can take a year, it could take 2 years or 4 years. These things, do at your own pace, and just be inspired by yourself, the people around you, your friends and family. But yeah, thank you so much.
Reach out to many of us if you have questions too. We're all very approachable.
Yes, definitely do. You can find most of us, I think, all on LinkedIn. I think we all have LinkedIn profiles, or you can also find us on Instagram. The names of the books are scrolling down at the bottom there, so definitely do check those out. Yeah, thank you very much. So I guess we'll say goodbye now.
Can I just quickly say, Crystal,
Sure.
before you go, it's just thanks to Crystal as well for putting this on top of a full-time job
Crystal,
and all the organisation it goes. So yeah, I think you just need to thank yourself as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
All
Okay.
right.
Thank you. Bye.